On the morning of April 18, 1986, in Madison County, Iowa, 72-year-old Walter Grayson stood beside the faded red paint of his 1949 Farmall M, watching a black German Shepherd strain against a heavy leather leash only 30 feet away. Deputy Carl Benson tightened his grip on the collar, while 3 county officials looked on from the gravel road. The dog had already sent 2 grown men scrambling onto the bed of a pickup truck earlier that week. Nobody expected the old farmer to remain standing, least of all the young state inspector who had requested the K-9 unit. Yet Walter never stepped back. He simply rested one weathered hand on the tractor's steel fender, looked at the animal with calm gray eyes, and quietly removed his worn leather gloves. The trouble had started 3 days earlier. A complaint had been filed claiming Walter was hiding stolen diesel fuel inside an abandoned machine shed. Rural theft had become a growing problem across central Iowa during the mid-1980s. Expensive tractors disappeared overnight. Fuel tanks were siphoned dry. Equipment worth thousands of dollars vanished before sunrise. The Iowa Department of Agriculture had begun working with county deputies to investigate suspicious reports. The complaint named Walter Grayson. Nobody in Winterset believed it. Walter had farmed the same 240 acres since returning from the Korean War in 1954. He wasn't rich. He wasn't poor. He simply worked. Corn in the spring, soybeans after rotation, hay for the cattle. Every fence post stood straight, because Walter believed crooked fences eventually created crooked habits. Let me tell you about Walter Grayson. His hands looked older than the rest of him. Thick fingers carried scars from barbed wire, frozen wrenches, and decades of repairing equipment without ever calling a mechanic. His boots were always polished with fresh oil rather than shoe polish, because he claimed leather respected honest work more than appearances. He spoke slowly, never wasted words, and in 42 years of farming Madison County soil, nobody could remember hearing him shout. His greatest pride wasn't the farmhouse. It wasn't the land. It was the old Farmall M parked beside the machine shed. Walter's father had purchased the tractor brand new in September 1949 from an international harvester dealer in Des Moines for $2,146, equipped with a 4-cylinder engine producing approximately 38 horsepower. The tractor weighed just over 5,000 pounds and had pulled nearly every plow, cultivator, wagon, and hay rake that ever crossed the Grayson property. Walter still had the original sales receipt folded inside a tobacco tin. Every winter, regardless of weather, he drained the fluids, inspected every bearing, cleaned every grease fitting, and repainted any spot where rust threatened the steel. The tractor wasn't simply machinery. It carried fingerprints from 3 generations. 28-year-old Ethan Collins didn't understand any of that. Fresh from Iowa State University with a degree in agricultural compliance, Ethan represented everything modern farming believed about efficiency. He wore polished work boots that had never touched manure. His clipboard remained cleaner than most dinner plates. His pickup contained a laptop worth more than Walter's tractor. He wasn't arrogant by nature, just certain. Certain regulations solved problems. Certain paperwork told the truth. Certain old men resisted change because they feared it. When Ethan first stepped onto Walter's property, he noticed peeling paint, weathered buildings, and machinery older than himself. He quietly wrote one word: neglected. Walter noticed. He said nothing. Instead, he offered Ethan fresh coffee poured from an old enamel pot. The younger man declined. Time mattered more than conversation. The inspection lasted almost 4 hours. Fuel tanks checked. Storage buildings measured. Equipment serial numbers recorded. Nothing suspicious appeared. Yet the anonymous complaint insisted stolen fuel remained hidden somewhere on the property. Ethan frowned. There has to be something we're missing. Walter calmly answered, sometimes people only find what they expect. The sentence irritated Ethan more than he admitted. By Friday morning, he requested assistance from the sheriff's office, and that request brought Deputy Carl Benson, along with Rex, the K-9. Rex weighed nearly 90 pounds and had completed narcotics, tracking, and evidence detection training. He obeyed commands instantly. His reputation stretched across 3 counties. Children crossed streets when they saw him working. Walter simply watched. Neighbors gathered along the roadside. Farmers always knew when something unusual happened. Within 20 minutes, nearly 15 people stood quietly near the fence. Among them stood grain elevator manager Steve Rollins, hardware store owner Harold Finch, and several younger farmers curious about whether the rumors were true. Ethan addressed the crowd confidently. "If there's hidden fuel here, Rex will find it." Someone nodded. Someone whispered. Walter remained silent. Deputy Benson unclipped the dog's shorter lead. Rex lowered his nose. The search began. The shepherd moved between stacked hay bales, around old cultivators, beneath wagons whose wheels hadn't turned in decades. Nothing. He circled the machine shed. Nothing. He sniffed diesel barrels legally stored beneath a covered lean-to. Nothing. Ethan's confidence slowly faded. Then Rex stopped. His ears lifted. His muscles stiffened. Instead of heading toward the storage buildings, he turned directly toward Walter. The crowd collectively inhaled. The shepherd growled. Low, deep, steady. Deputy Benson tightened the leash. "Ethan, I see it." Walter didn't move. Rex advanced another step. The growl became a bark powerful enough to echo across the pasture. Several neighbors instinctively backed away. Ethan raised his voice. "Sir, I need you to step away from the tractor." Walter shook his head once. No. The answer surprised everyone, including Walter himself. He gently rested both hands on the Farmall M's hood. His fingers brushed faded paint worn smooth by decades of harvests. The dog lunged. Deputy Benson struggled to hold him. Dust exploded beneath Rex's paws. The crowd gasped. Then something happened that nobody present, not Ethan, not the deputies, not the neighbors, and certainly not Walter himself, could have explained before that unforgettable morning in Madison County. Rex stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. The muscles in his shoulders relaxed, as though someone had flipped a switch. The furious barking disappeared. His ears, which had been pinned back in aggression only a second before, lifted forward. The German shepherd took one slow step closer to Walter, lowered his head, and quietly sniffed the old farmer's outstretched hand. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from the breeze, pushing through last year's corn stalks, stacked behind the machine shed. Deputy Carl Benson frowned. That's not normal. He had worked with Rex for nearly 6 years. The dog had tracked fugitives through frozen creek beds, located missing children in heavy timber, and uncovered stolen property buried beneath fresh soil. Rex trusted almost nobody outside his handler. Yet now the dog leaned gently against Walter's leg. Walter scratched behind the shepherd's ear as if greeting an old farm collie. "I think he's tired," Walter said softly. Deputy Benson slowly released the tension on the leash. "I've never seen him do that." Neither had Ethan Collins. The young inspector stared in complete disbelief. Only moments earlier he had expected the dog to uncover evidence, proving the anonymous complaint correct. Instead, the canine seemed more interested in standing beside the old farmer than searching his property. Then Rex did something even stranger. He walked past Walter, past the machine shed, past the diesel tanks, straight toward an abandoned wooden barn that hadn't been used for livestock in nearly 15 years. The structure leaned slightly to one side. Several boards had weathered gray. One window had long since lost its glass. Ethan had already inspected the building the previous afternoon and found nothing unusual. Rex stopped outside north wall. He sniffed the ground, circled twice, then began pawing furiously at the dirt. Deputy Benson's expression changed immediately. "There." Ethan hurried over. "What is it?" "I don't know." Within minutes, shovels appeared from Walter's workshop. Even Walter joined the digging without complaint. The soil was soft from recent spring rain, and after only 8 inches the blade struck something solid. Not metal. Wood. The deputies carefully uncovered a weathered crate wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting. Someone in the crowd whispered. Another farmer removed his cap. The crate measured nearly 4 feet long. Deputy Benson pried it open. Inside were dozens of sealed diesel fuel transfer pumps bearing serial numbers that matched equipment reported stolen from farms across 3 Iowa counties during the previous winter. Silence settled over everyone. Ethan looked from the crate to Walter. "You buried these?" Walter slowly shook his head. "I've never seen that box before today." The deputies believed him almost immediately. The location made no sense. The crate wasn't hidden inside Walter's buildings. It wasn't locked away. It had been buried only a few feet beyond the property line, where an old fence had collapsed years earlier. In the confusion of overgrown grass and missing posts, it looked as though the land belonged to Walter when, legally, it did not. Deputy Benson unfolded a county survey map from his truck. After several careful measurements, he nodded. This spot belongs to the abandoned Miller property. The crowd murmured. The Millers had moved to Missouri almost a decade earlier after selling their livestock. Their empty acreage bordered Walter's farm, but hadn't been maintained since. Someone had used the neglected land as a hiding place, and someone had made sure suspicion pointed toward the old farmer. Ethan lowered his clipboard. For the first time since arriving in Madison County, certainty abandoned him. Let me tell you about anonymous accusations in rural America during the 1980s. Most people imagine crime happening in cities, but farm communities faced a different kind of theft. Diesel fuel, hydraulic pumps, tractor weights, batteries, and even entire combines disappeared under cover of darkness. Because neighbors trusted one another, criminals often relied on rumors more than weapons. If enough people believed a hard-working farmer might be dishonest, investigators naturally looked his way first. Sometimes reputations built over 40 years could be shaken by a single unsigned letter. Walter understood that better than anyone. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. Bad rumors, he quietly said, travel faster than tractors. Deputy Benson smiled despite himself. That's probably true. Ethan couldn't return the smile. Embarrassment settled heavily on his shoulders. He had walked onto Walter's farm convinced that modern procedures would expose an old man's secrets. Instead, an experienced K-9 had uncovered evidence, proving Walter innocent while exposing an entirely different crime. The younger inspector removed his cap. "I owe you an apology." Walter looked at him for several seconds, then nodded once. "You don't owe me words." Ethan looked confused. "You owe the next farmer patience." Those 7 words stayed with Ethan for years. As deputies photographed the stolen equipment, Rex wandered back toward the Farmall M. He stopped beside its enormous rear wheel, sat down, and refused to move. Deputy Benson tugged gently on the leash. Nothing. The dog simply stared at the old tractor. Walter noticed. He walked over and placed his palm against the faded steel hood. "This old machine's seen more seasons than both of us." Rex softly wagged his tail. The crowd laughed, not at Walter this time, but with quiet relief. Even Ethan found himself smiling. Yet one mystery remained unanswered. Who had buried the stolen equipment, and who had deliberately sent investigators to Walter's farm? Late that afternoon, while deputies expanded their search onto the abandoned Miller property, another discovery brought every conversation to a stop. Fresh pickup tire tracks disappeared into a grove of cottonwood trees. The tracks were only hours old. Whoever had hidden the crate had come back, and judging by the direction those tracks led, they had been watching the entire investigation unfold from somewhere much closer than anyone had imagined. Deputy Carl Benson knelt beside the fresh tire tracks and pressed 2 fingers into the damp soil. "They're recent." No one argued. The rain that had fallen before sunrise had left the ground soft enough to preserve every tread pattern. The pickup had crossed the abandoned Miller property only a few hours earlier. Whoever drove it had watched from the cottonwood grove while the investigation unfolded. Walter quietly looked across the field. "They're gone now." Ethan followed his gaze. "How can you tell?" Walter pointed toward a line of broken grass, swaying differently from the rest. "The wind's blowing east. That grass is still trying to stand back up." Deputy Benson turned toward Ethan with raised eyebrows. "I didn't even notice that." Walter simply shrugged. "You spend 50 years watching fields. Eventually they start talking." The deputies followed the tracks for nearly half a mile before they reached an old gravel service road. There, the trail disappeared beneath harder ground. No license plate, no fingerprints, no witnesses, just another mystery. The stolen fuel pumps were loaded onto county trucks while investigators expanded their search. By evening, word had spread across Madison County. Walter Grayson was innocent. The anonymous complaint had been a setup. People who had quietly wondered if the old farmer had finally fallen on hard times now felt ashamed for believing even a small part of the rumor. Not everyone. There was still one man who refused to accept it. Local agricultural supplier Daniel Mercer, 41 years old, owned the largest equipment dealership within 30 miles. He sold modern tractors with enclosed cabs, electronic controls, and financing plans that stretched longer than some marriages. Daniel had built his business honestly, but he had little patience for old machinery, especially Walter's Farmall M. 2 days after the investigation, Walter drove the old tractor into Winterset for replacement bearings. The engine produced its familiar steady rhythm, echoing through the town square exactly as it had for decades. Daniel spotted him from outside his dealership. He smiled, not kindly. Several customers stood nearby discussing spring planting when Walter climbed down from the tractor. Daniel laughed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I can't believe that museum piece still moves under its own power." A few younger mechanics chuckled. Daniel continued, "You know, Walter, that thing belongs in a parade, not a cornfield." More laughter. Walter wiped a small spot of dust from the steering wheel, then calmly answered, "It still knows the way home." The laughter grew even louder. Daniel shook his head. "One day it'll quit pulling, and you'll finally buy a real tractor." Walter looked at the Farmall for a long moment. "When that day comes," he smiled gently, "I'll know it worked harder than either of us." The crowd became quiet. Nobody had expected such a simple answer. Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he walked back toward his showroom. But something in Walter's words lingered. "Let me tell you about old cast-iron tractor engines. People often confuse horsepower with strength. Horsepower tells you how quickly an engine can do work. Torque tells you how much turning force it can produce. Older tractors like the Farmall M weren't designed to win races. They were built to create steady pulling power at lower engine speeds. Their heavy cast-iron blocks absorb vibration, while simpler mechanical systems meant fewer parts could fail. Modern tractors produce far more horsepower, but many older machines earned their reputation because they delivered consistent torque hour after hour with basic maintenance and careful operation. That's why so many are still working generations later. Walter understood that without needing engineering textbooks. Experience had taught him. The following week, Deputy Benson returned, not with Rex, with news. Investigators had identified the anonymous letter's typewriter. It belonged to an abandoned storage office, rented months earlier under a false name. Inside they found maps, fuel records, serial numbers. Someone had organized a large theft operation across 3 counties. Walter listened quietly. "Did you catch him?" Deputy Benson slowly shook his head. "Not yet." The investigation continued through the summer. Then came July, and with July came trouble no investigator could predict. A violent thunderstorm rolled across Madison County with winds exceeding 60 miles per hour. Lightning struck power lines near the northern fields, igniting dry grass left from the previous harvest. Within minutes, fire spread across hundreds of acres. Farmers rushed to save equipment. Volunteer firefighters battled flames driven by relentless wind. Daniel Mercer's dealership stood directly in the fire's path. Brand new tractors worth hundreds of thousands of dollars sat outside awaiting delivery. Panic spread quickly. Modern diesel engines couldn't simply be abandoned. Employees scrambled to move as many machines as possible. Then disaster struck. One enormous 4-wheel drive tractor stalled. Its electronic controls failed after water damaged critical wiring during a storm. It blocked the dealership entrance. Every machine behind it became trapped. Flames crept closer. Daniel shouted orders. Nothing worked. Tow trucks couldn't arrive in time. The firefighters estimated less than 15 minutes before the first buildings ignited. Then someone heard an unmistakable sound. Pop, 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 pop. The deep, steady exhaust note of an old Farmall M. Walter appeared through the smoke. His faded red tractor rolled steadily toward the dealership. No electronics. No computer. No hesitation. Daniel stared in disbelief. "You came." Walter nodded once. "You looked like you needed another tractor." Without another word, Walter fastened a heavy logging chain to the disabled machine. The Farmall's engine settled into a slow, determined growl. The chain tightened. For one long second, nothing happened. Then the rear tires bit into the gravel. The old tractor strained. Smoke curled from its exhaust. The disabled machine shifted. An inch, then another, and suddenly thousands of pounds of stalled steel began moving away from the flames. Every firefighter stopped to watch. Every mechanic stood frozen. Even Daniel forgot to breathe. The impossible wasn't that the old tractor moved the newer one. It was what Deputy Benson noticed, standing perfectly still beyond the smoke. A familiar pickup truck, parked beside the cottonwood trees. Watching again, Deputy Carl Benson recognized the pickup before anyone else did. The faded blue paint, the cracked driver's side mirror, the unusual tread pattern that matched the tracks found beside the abandoned Miller property weeks earlier. He didn't hesitate. Leaving the firefighters to finish securing the dealership, Benson climbed into his patrol truck and accelerated toward the cottonwood grove. The pickup roared to life, spraying gravel across the road as it fled south toward Highway 92. For nearly 8 miles the chase continued through winding county roads. Then the driver made one mistake. He turned onto an old maintenance lane that ended at a washed-out wooden bridge crossing North River. There was nowhere left to go. The suspect abandoned the truck and ran into the timber. Rex, brought to the scene by another deputy, needed less than 10 minutes to track him. The man arrested that afternoon was Harold Pike, a former fuel distributor who had quietly built a theft ring by stealing equipment from isolated farms, hiding it on abandoned land, and sending anonymous accusations toward respected landowners whenever investigators began getting close. Walter's spotless reputation had made him the perfect target. If suspicion settled on the old farmer, nobody would think to search the neighboring property. The scheme had worked, until one K9 refused to follow expectations. Back at Daniel Mercer's dealership, the fire crews finally contained the flames. The largest building survived. So did nearly every tractor waiting for delivery. Daniel stood silently beside Walter's Farmall M, looking at the faded paint with entirely different eyes than he had only a week before. He reached out and rested his hand on the hood. "It's warmer than I expected." Walter smiled. "It has been working." Daniel laughed softly, not the loud, mocking laugh from the town square. A different one, the kind that comes when pride finally gives way to understanding. "I owe you more than an apology." Walter adjusted the chain before rolling it neatly into a coil. "You don't owe me anything. I laughed at you." Walter nodded. "You did. And I was wrong." Walter looked across the smoke-covered fields before answering. "We've all been wrong about something." That simple sentence carried more weight than any lecture ever could. The following Monday, Daniel surprised everyone in Madison County. He moved the newest tractors inside the showroom. Outside, near the entrance where every customer could see it, he parked Walter's Farmall M for one afternoon with a handwritten sign, "Still working since 1949. People stopped. They took photographs. Older farmers smiled. Younger ones asked questions. Daniel answered every one of them with respect. He no longer described old machinery as outdated. He described it as proven. Have you ever realized that the person you doubted was quietly carrying knowledge you hadn't earned yet? It's an uncomfortable feeling, but it's also one of the fastest ways to grow. Every generation believes it has discovered better answers. Sometimes it has. Sometimes it simply asks different questions. Wisdom often survives because someone cared enough to keep it alive. Let me tell you about Rex. The German Shepherd became something of a local legend after the investigation. Newspaper stories praised his instincts, but Deputy Benson always insisted the credit belonged elsewhere. "Dogs read people better than paperwork," he liked to say. Rex had sensed what the investigators could not: fear, or rather, the complete absence of it. Walter wasn't afraid because he had nothing to hide. Animals notice honesty in ways that rarely make sense until afterward. Rex continued serving Madison County for another 5 years before retiring to Deputy Benson's farm, where he spent his remaining days chasing grandchildren instead of criminals. Walter visited often. The dog always recognized him. Time moved the way it always does on farms. Quietly. Harvest followed harvest. Spring followed winter. 5 years later, Ethan Collins had become one of Iowa's most respected agricultural inspectors. New employees often accompanied him on rural inspections, and every one of them eventually heard the same story. He would stop beside an old barn or weathered tractor and say, "Never mistake age for neglect." Then he would tell them about Walter Grayson, not because the story embarrassed him, because it changed him. Daniel Mercer changed too. His dealership began offering restoration parts for vintage Farmalls, John Deere 2-cylinders, Oliver 88s, and Alice Chalmers WD-45s alongside the latest equipment. Customers noticed. Older farmers returned. Younger farmers discovered that preserving history and embracing progress didn't have to compete. They could work together. Walter never became famous. He never wanted to. He continued planting corn every spring with the same deliberate rhythm that had guided him for decades. The Farmall M remained his trusted companion, starting faithfully each season after careful winter maintenance. In the autumn of 1998, at the age of 84, Walter Grayson passed away peacefully in the farmhouse where he and his late wife had raised 3 children. His funeral filled the small church beyond capacity. Farmers arrived driving pickups coated with harvest dust. Deputies attended in uniform. Daniel stood beside Ethan near the back. Neither spoke much. Words seemed unnecessary. After the service, Walter's daughter, Sarah, inherited the farm. The first machine she started the following spring wasn't the newest tractor in the shed. It was the old Farmall M. Its familiar engine echoed across the same fields Walter had walked for nearly half a century. Neighbors paused to listen. Some smiled. Some wiped away tears. The tractor still works today. Its faded paint carries new scratches. Its steering wheel has been held by another generation. But every time its engine settles into that slow, confident rhythm, people remember the morning when an aggressive K9 was expected to expose a guilty man, and instead revealed an honest one, because that was never really a story about a dog, or a tractor, or a criminal investigation. It was about the quiet strength that never needs to announce itself. Some things aren't proven by how loudly they defend themselves. They're proven by how faithfully they keep showing up when the work needs doing. If this story reminded you of someone in your own life, a parent, grandparent, neighbor, mentor, or friend who earned respect through steady work instead of loud words, I hope you'll share their story in the comments. I read them because they're reminders that people like Walter were never as rare as the world sometimes believes. And if you'd like another true-to-the-heart farming story, the next one follows an elderly rancher who rescued an abandoned steam tractor everyone else wanted to scrap, only for it to save an entire community years later. I think you'll be glad you came back for that one.